Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Mysteries and Oddities video. Well, I thought I would mix this one in here while I'm continuing to do your Ghost and Spirits videos, mainly because I just read a recent article about this very set of tragic circumstances. It made me realize too that there's going to be an anniversary of this coming up next year. If you can believe it, it's going to celebrate 40 years since it happened back in 1982. And it kind of reminded me of a video I did earlier in the year, the Sunset Limited train derailment, where both involved something very bad happening to a group of people, but caused by a perpetrator that remains unknown to this day. That's what makes this case here with regards to these murders very, very mysterious, because no one knows essentially who caused this. I mean, there may be one prime suspect, but still nothing in terms of the actual smoking gun as to who did this. So that's why it again remains such a fascination even after all these years. And in fact, you're looking at a representation of it now. Colloquially, it's known as the Chicago Tylenol Murders. So let's go ahead and let's talk about all the information associated with these very, very tragic actions. So here's essentially what occurred. This happened back in September up until October of 1982. So a little before my time. I don't have any personal experience when it comes to, let's say, seeing this on the news or reading it and so on. So some of you that may have lived through this time period and have seen it, then please always post those comments below about your experience. But here's essentially what happened during that specific time. What's interesting is when you think about it, anything you buy out there, let's say at a grocery store, a small convenience store, anything that has food within it, you buy it with the assumption that it's 100% safe. Like, in other words, no one has tampered with it. Nobody has done anything bad with it. You go in, you buy it, you eat it, or you drink it, and then that's pretty much it. Everything is A-okay on there. And you go by that almost innocence, the idea that people are doing and making all these things and nothing bad is happening to the items themselves. Like, they're not actually being poisoned, as was the case here. And that's why, again, there's no mass panic associated with it. But as it turned out, there in the Chicago area, all of a sudden, within those 2 months, that's when people suddenly started dying. In fact, reading some of the poor victims involved, it all started first on September 29th, 1982. It involved a very tragic case of a 12-year-old young girl by the name of Mary Kellerman. She ended up dying. And then there was another person, Adam Janus, age 27. He died in the hospital very later that same day. And then his brother, his sister-in-law, also ended up dying shortly thereafter. And then there was another person, a woman by the name of Mary McFarland. She ended up dying. Another person named Paula Prince, and another one named Mary Reiner, all ended up dying very similarly, like almost suddenly, all within a short circumference of together. When people started realizing that, hey, there was this sudden string of people dying, and it seems to be within a small area, there were these loose connections that were trying to be done, making sure that, yes, what's going on? What is the link of who's causing when it comes to this? In fact, I was reading some information that there was at least some other things that were being theorized at that time, but quickly it was found out that all of them had one thing in similarity. It was the fact that all of them had taken some extra strength Tylenol at that time. So right before I mention anything else, though, I wanted to say, of course, that this was absolutely nothing having to do with Tylenol themselves. Obviously, they had nothing in terms of these poisonings being done purposely by them, nothing along those lines. But the similar link was that something had happened to their product. Whoever had done it, in other words, had done something very bad to their product, and now it was impacting these people. And so police and also other law enforcement, the Justice Department, the FBI, they started going out and then actively looking, doing as much investigation as possible to find out where was the basis associated with these tampered bottles of Tylenol, from what outlets did they come from. And this happened over several weeks, trying to link things together, trying to piece especially where the origin of these purchases were made, because if you have that happen, that'll give a good idea of how much you can save other people that may be impacted if they bought let's say those similar Tylenol from that same area, and then also trying to see what could be done when it comes to trying to figure out who the prime suspect was. Like if you had something like this, like in terms of a person that could be caught on surveillance camera, or maybe witnesses that could easily describe, hey, we saw this person here, and similarly they were over there at another location, and they happened to be around that the medicine aisles, specifically around the Tylenol area. That's the kind of stuff that the police and other law enforcement, all of them, had to do within a very short time period because of the impact that this had. This is Tylenol. This is just a regular over-the-counter medicine, the kind of one that families give to one another, moms give to their children, dads give to their spouses, and so on. Like they're the ones that do this type of stuff for making themselves better, not realizing that somebody out there had taken these bottles. And at that time, it was a much different circumstance when the making of the bottle was done and the capsules themselves. But somebody had taken these and basically did this. They poisoned them with potassium cyanide, which is, of course, highly, highly lethal. This is the kind of stuff that you see in the movies when it comes to those people that take those sudden pills, the ones that cause them to die suddenly because they don't want to be captured or they don't want to be interrogated and give out sensitive information, stuff like that. But here, it was absolutely real life, and it was happening to these poor random people that, again, just bought these things innocently enough from any type of aisle. They're in the grocery store or food mart or anywhere else, and there they were now suddenly being impacted by these sudden deaths. And so when that occurred, again, it was found out that it all had to do with Tylenol production, and at that time, Johnson & Johnson, who was the distributors of this, decided to do a huge action. They in turn stated that they would recall every single Tylenol bottle, all of them, within the United States. If I'm not mistaken, that was within the entire United States themselves. It was an absolute 100% nationwide recall. And because of this, about 31 million bottles at that time were out there. They were all recalled, and it ended up costing them a little over $100 million, which in today's dollars would be over $250 million, just to make sure that, again, there was nothing that could be done bad with those bottles. Nothing that in turn, like let's say if that was in the Chicago area that it was being impacted, and on top of that, there were similar copycats that were suddenly trying to do that sick thing where they see this happening in one location and then they think to themselves, let me go do it over here. And that was happening in an area there in California. That's when Johnson & Johnson decided no more. Like they immediately cut that stuff down and they halted all Tylenol production. They wanted to make sure that everything was recalled and they would start it from scratch. And it ended up helping because there was no more set of course, poor tragic deaths. A total of 7 people ended up dying from these poisoned capsules, but no more deaths occurred afterward. And Johnson & Johnson was later praised because of their very, very momentous action and also distributing warnings to hospitals, and then also circulating retail ads, and then also TV too, just making sure, assuring people that, hey, it's almost like a blank check policy. They're going to do everything they can to make certain that whoever was doing this will not be able to do anything else, at least with their products, which of course inspired others to do the same, and then led to eventual changes in the law with regards to the capsules and with regards to those actual bottles themselves. That's why today, whenever you buy any over-the-counter drugs, they have those sealed caps on them. In other words, tamper-proof stuff. And then on top of that, I believe the capsules themselves were made differently to ensure that there's nothing that could be added on them that would impact someone if, let's say, there happened to be some of that poisonous stuff still sprinkled on top. Like, in other words, it won't impact them afterwards. Now, as far as the identity suspects associated with this very, very horrific thing, as it turns out, there was one person. I'm not going to necessarily name them here. You can find them online as far as who that name is. And in fact, they've been interviewed twice at least, and maybe even several more times by the Justice Department, but there was one prime suspect, and the reason why I'm not mentioning them is because officially they haven't been found guilty of anything. In fact, it reminded me of when I was doing the video of the TCBY murders, the infamous ones that were here in the Austin area. The main reason I didn't name those suspects is because, again, they were just suspects. Nothing was ever truly 100% found guilty, and so just for, liability purposes, you can't really do that. But if you look online, you can see who that prime suspect was, and they in turn made themselves aware to law enforcement by apparently sending to Johnson & Johnson a $1 million demand stating that they will stop the murders if they get their $1 million. So it was almost like an extortion. And so when that happened, that alerted the authorities, and then that's why this person has become one of the prime suspects. There was others there too, but still, even after all these years, even after the extensive review of that prime suspect from various departments, the Department of Justice, the FBI, local police as well, even as late as 2009, that's when federal agents went back to the home of that prime suspect to try to get more items, to try to link that person to these actual murders. Even after all these years and coming up on the 40th year anniversary, there's nothing. There's no known perpetrator. There's no known motive as well. Whoever was doing this was pretty much clearly trying to do this anonymously, not making any of their actions aware, not saying any demands as well, nothing in terms of this person giving any hint as to why they did what they did. It just remains as mysterious as when it first started and then suddenly stopped. And here we are 40 years later, not knowing anything as far as the whereabouts of this person. If there is one thing, it's this. Police heavily assume that one of the people that was murdered, Paula Prince, that I was mentioning earlier, she bought it at a Walgreens there in the Chicago area. It's believed that a bearded man that followed her from behind, in other words, seeing her get that cyanide tempered Tylenol bottle and then going, I guess, over to the register and so on to pay it. This person may have been the actual killer themselves. This was someone that wanted to see who was purchasing that exact Tylenol bottle in a sick way. It's like a way of them finding out who that person is that's now going to die. And so that probably remains the closest in terms of any physical evidence as to who that perpetrator may be. 40 years later, who knows who that person is? That person may still be alive, or they may be dead by now. But who knows if maybe we'll have any kind of breakthrough, maybe if law enforcement will have it, or maybe someone else will finally come forward and say they did it, or who knows, maybe somebody else might rat them out. But in any case, once that happens, if there is any updates, I'll definitely provide it here. But that's pretty much it. That's all the information associated with these very mysterious circumstances, the Chicago Tylenol murders. If anyone, again, has any more info on the local level, maybe you lived through these circumstances, like in other words, seeing them happen, let's say on TV or reading about it in the news or a new friend of friends and so on, then please post those comments below. I'm always excited to read that type of exact information. So, all right, everybody. Thanks again as always. Take care.